I want to talk to you today about something that's going to sound completely counterintuitive. Something that might make you defensive because it touches on what you're most proud of, what you've built your identity around, what everyone tells you you're good at. Here it is, that thing you're naturally talented at, that skill that comes easily to you, that people praise you for, that you've relied on your entire life, might be the very thing that's keeping you stuck. That special talent you have, it might be your biggest trap. Now, I can already feel your resistance. You're thinking, what? That makes no sense. My talent is my advantage. It's what makes me valuable. It's what I should be leveraging, not questioning. And I understand that reaction. We've been told our whole lives to identify our strengths and double down on them. Find what you're good at and do more of it. Discover your gift and build your life around it. Your talent is your ticket to success, recognition, fulfillment. But let me tell you what I've observed after years of watching people, highly talented people, remain fundamentally stuck despite their abilities. What I've learned from my own experience of being trapped by the very thing I was best at. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your talent creates a groove, and grooves become ruts, and ruts become prisons. You get so good at one thing, so praised for it, so identified with it, that you can't imagine yourself doing anything else. And slowly, imperceptibly, your greatest strength becomes the walls of a cage you didn't realize you were building. Because here's what no one tells you about being talented at something. It makes you safe. It makes you legible to the world. People understand what you are, what you offer, what box to put you in. And there's tremendous pressure, internal and external, to stay in that box, to keep being the thing you're known for being, to keep performing the role your talent assigned to you, even when that role no longer fits, even when it's slowly suffocating you. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, just to yourself. That thing you're really good at, that thing everyone knows you for, do you still love doing it? Or do you keep doing it because you're good at it, because it's expected, because it's safe, because walking away from it would mean walking away from your identity? When was the last time you felt genuine excitement about it versus obligation to it? If you hesitated before answering, we need to talk about what's actually happening here. Let's go back to where we learned this completely wrong idea about talent. For most of human history, what you were good at was largely determined by birth. You were born into a family of farmers, you became a farmer. Born into a family of blacksmiths, you learned metalwork. Born into aristocracy, you learned the skills of your class. There wasn't much room for discovering your unique talents, because survival required you to do what your position demanded. But then the modern era happened. Social mobility increased. The idea emerged that you could be anything you wanted to be, and with it came a new cultural narrative. You have special gifts. You need to discover them, and once you discover them, you should pursue them relentlessly. Your talent is your destiny. Your gift is your calling. Find what you're naturally good at and build your entire life around it. The self-help industry amplified this mythology. Books with titles like Find Your Genius and Discover Your Gift and Unlock Your Potential. They all promised the same thing. You have something you're uniquely good at, and finding it is the key to success and fulfillment. They said your talent is your competitive advantage, that you should focus on your strengths and outsource or ignore your weaknesses. That trying to be good at everything makes you mediocre at everything, so you should double down on what comes naturally. And this advice sounds perfectly reasonable, even obvious. Of course you should focus on what you're good at. Of course you should leverage your natural abilities. Of course you should build on your strengths rather than fighting against your limitations. Except here's the problem. Your talent becomes your identity, and your identity becomes a prison. And the prison is so comfortable, so familiar, so well decorated with praise and recognition that you don't realize you're trapped until you try to leave and discover you can't imagine who you'd be without it. Think about the people you know who are exceptionally talented at something. Really think about them. The brilliant analyst who can't stop analyzing everything, including their relationships, until they've thought themselves into paralysis. The naturally empathetic person who's so good at helping others that they've completely neglected their own needs. The charismatic performer who's so addicted to attention that they can't function without an audience. The intellectually gifted person who's so comfortable in their head that they've never developed emotional intelligence. The naturally athletic person who built their entire identity around their body and now, as they age, has no idea who they are. Their talent gave them something: recognition, success, a sense of purpose. But it also took something: flexibility, growth, the ability to develop other parts of themselves, the freedom to change, to evolve, to become something different than what they've always been. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin wrote about the hedgehog and the fox. The hedgehog knows one big thing. The fox knows many things. And Berlin argued that while we tend to admire hedgehogs, people who have one clear strength, one defining characteristic, one area of genius, foxes are often more adaptable, more resilient, more capable of navigating complexity. But our culture trains us to be hedgehogs. Find your one thing, master your one thing, be known for your one thing. And never mind that the world keeps changing, and your one thing might become obsolete or irrelevant or just deeply unfulfilling. Let me tell you about my own experience with this trap, because I'm not speaking abstractly. I discovered early that I was good with words. I could write clearly, I could analyze ideas, I could explain complex concepts in ways people found accessible. And this talent opened doors. It created opportunities. It gave me a career, a livelihood, recognition. People knew me as the person who writes about ideas. And for a long time, that felt good. It felt like I'd found my place. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was trapped. Every project I considered was filtered through, is this the kind of thing I write about? Every opportunity was evaluated based on, does this fit my brand? Every new interest I developed was suppressed because it didn't align with what people expected from me. I had become legible to the world, which felt safe. But I'd sacrificed illegibility to myself, which was suffocating. I couldn't pursue interests that seemed frivolous or off-brand. I couldn't experiment with different modes of thinking or creating. I couldn't allow myself to be bad at something new because I was so identified with being good at this established thing. My talent had given me a life, but it had also written the script for that life. And I was no longer sure I wanted to follow that script, but I couldn't imagine what else I would do. Because who was I, if not this? Here's what makes talent particularly insidious as a trap. It works. Your talent delivers results. It gets you praise, success, money, recognition. So every time you consider moving away from it, every time you think about developing something else, the voice in your head says, why would you abandon something that's working? Why would you start over as a beginner in something else when you're already an expert here? Isn't that wasteful, irresponsible, ungrateful? And that voice is rational. It's not wrong. Walking away from your established talent is objectively risky. It means leaving behind certainty for uncertainty, leaving behind competence for incompetence, leaving behind recognition for anonymity. Of course you should stay where you're successful. Of course you should keep doing what works. Except that's not how human fulfillment actually works. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi studied flow states, those moments when you're so absorbed in what you're doing that you lose track of time. And he found that flow happens at the intersection of challenge and skill. When something is too easy relative to your skill level, you're bored. When it's too hard, you're anxious. But right in that sweet spot where you're stretched but not overwhelmed, that's where you feel most alive. And here's the problem with staying in your talent zone. It stops being challenging. You get so good that you can do it on autopilot. You can perform your special skill without really being present, without really growing, without really feeling anything except the familiar satisfaction of competence. You're no longer in flow, you're in cruise control. And cruise control feels safe but dead. I've noticed this pattern particularly in people who were identified as gifted children. They showed early talent in something, music, academics, sports, whatever. They were praised for it constantly. Their identity formed around it. They pursued it seriously, often to the exclusion of other interests, and they achieved success. But then, in their 30s or 40s, they have this crisis. They realize they're still doing the thing they were good at when they were 8, and they have no idea if they actually want to be doing it, or if they're just on a track that was set decades ago. They're trapped by early success, by the expectations built around their talent, by the identity they've performed for so long that they can't remember what's authentic and what's performance. And the thought of starting something new, of being a beginner again, of potentially failing at something, feels impossible. Because their entire sense of worth is tied to being good at this one thing. The writer David Foster Wallace gave a famous commencement speech about "This is water," about how our default settings, the unconscious ways we navigate the world, can trap us. But I think there's another default setting he didn't mention, the default of returning to what we're good at. When faced with any challenge or opportunity, we default to solving it with our established talent. The hammer sees everything as a nail. And we become hammers, unable to imagine ourselves as anything else. Think about how this plays out practically. You're naturally good at taking care of others. So you become the person everyone comes to with their problems. You build a career around helping. You build relationships where you're always the helper. And it feels good. You're needed, valued, important. But slowly you realize you've trained everyone in your life to see you only as the caretaker. You're not allowed to need help. You're not allowed to be the one who's struggling. You've trapped yourself in the role your talent assigned to you. And now, when you try to step out of it, when you need support instead of giving it, people are confused or uncomfortable. You've become illegible outside your talent. Or you're naturally analytical. You can see patterns, understand systems, solve problems logically. So you become the person who analyzes everything. You build a career around your analytical ability. You approach relationships analytically. And it serves you well until you encounter something that can't be analyzed. Grief, love, art, the fundamental absurdity of existence. And you don't have the tools to process it because you spent your whole life developing only one tool. You're intellectually sophisticated, but emotionally underdeveloped. And your talent, which opens so many doors, has also closed others. Or you're naturally charismatic. You can read a room. You know how to make people like you. You know what to say, to charm, to persuade, to win people over. So you build a life around your charisma. But you've become so good at performing that you've lost touch with what you actually feel, what you actually think, who you actually are beneath the performance. You're surrounded by people who like the performance but don't know the performer. Your talent has given you connection but prevented intimacy. The psychoanalyst Adam Phillips wrote about the unlived life, the person you might have been if you'd made different choices. And he argues that we're haunted by this unlived life, by the potential selves we abandoned. But what I'm talking about is slightly different. It's the unlived life you're still living alongside your actual life. The life where you're more than just your talent, where you're allowed to be bad at things, where you're allowed to change and evolve and become interested in things that don't leverage your established strengths. So how do you know if your talent has become a trap? Let me give you some clear markers. If you're successful but unfulfilled, it's probably a trap. Success that comes from your talent feels empty after a while if the talent isn't connected to genuine current interest. You're achieving, you're recognized, but you feel hollow because you're performing something you've outgrown. If you can't imagine doing anything else, it's probably a trap. Not because you love it so much you wouldn't want to do anything else, but because you're so identified with it that you can't conceive of yourself as anything other than the person who does this thing. Your talent has become your entire identity. An identity is always a limitation. If you avoid being a beginner at anything new, it's probably a trap. You stick to what you're already good at because being incompetent feels intolerable. You've gotten so used to the feeling of competence that you've lost your tolerance for the awkwardness, frustration, and humility of learning something new. Your talent has made you risk-averse. If people only see you as one thing, it's probably a trap. They can't imagine you doing anything else. They're uncomfortable when you express interest in something outside your established domain. They say things like, "But you're so good at this, why would you do that?" Your talent has made you legible, but one-dimensional. If you're good at something but no longer curious about it, it's a trap. You can perform your talent mechanically, without real engagement. You've mastered it to the point where it no longer challenges you, but you keep doing it because it's what you know. Your talent has become a habit, not a passion. If your talent is covering for underdeveloped parts of yourself, it's a trap. You're so good at this one thing that you've never had to develop other capacities. You use your talent to compensate. The analytical person who can't access emotions. The empathetic person who can't set boundaries. The creative person who can't handle practical logistics. Your talent is both a strength and a crutch. If you're more afraid of losing your talent than excited about using it, it's a trap. You're holding on defensively, worried about decline, about relevance, about what happens when the thing you're known for becomes less valued. Your talent has become something you're protecting rather than something you're expressing. So what do you do if you recognize yourself in this? If you realize your talent has become a trap, first you have to grieve the fantasy of finding your calling. The idea that you have one true purpose, one special gift that defines your path. It's a comforting story, but it's limiting. You're not looking for the one thing you're meant to do. You're discovering what you want to do now, in this phase of your life, knowing that it might change. Your talent might have served you well for a season without being your destiny forever. Second, you have to get comfortable with being bad at things. This is genuinely hard if you've built your identity around competence. Start small. Take a class in something you have no aptitude for. Learn a language poorly. Try a sport you're terrible at. Let yourself feel the frustration and humiliation of being a beginner. And then notice that you survive it. That your worth isn't actually determined by your competence. That there's something freeing about doing something badly just because you want to. Third, you have to separate your talent from your identity. You're not the analytical person, or the empathetic person, or the creative person. You're a person who happens to be good at analysis, or empathy, or creativity. The difference is subtle but crucial. One is a box you live in. The other is a tool you use. One defines you completely. The other is one aspect of you among many. This means experimenting with describing yourself differently. Stop introducing yourself through your talent. Stop letting your profession or primary skill be the first thing people know about you. Notice how uncomfortable this feels. Notice how much you've relied on your talent to make you legible to others, and sit with that discomfort. Fourth, you have to actively develop deliberately neglected areas. What have you avoided because you weren't naturally good at it? What interests have you suppressed because they didn't fit your brand? What parts of yourself have atrophied because you focused so intensely on your talent? Those are the areas to explore now. Not to become an expert in them, but to become more whole. Maybe you're intellectually developed, but emotionally stunted. Time to work on emotional literacy. Maybe you're creative, but practically helpless. Time to learn basic life skills. Maybe you're empathetic, but unable to be alone. Time to develop capacity for solitude. The goal isn't to be good at everything. It's to be less dependent on your one thing for your sense of self. Fifth, you have to question the success your talent brought you. This is the hardest part because it feels ungrateful. You have a career, recognition, financial stability because of your talent. How dare you question it? But you have to ask, is this actually the life you want? Or is this the life your talent made accessible and you've just been following that path because it was open? Sometimes talent opens a door that seems like opportunity, but is actually just circumstance. You were good at something, so you pursued it. It worked, so you continued. years passed, and now you're successful at something you're not sure you'd choose if you were starting over. Your talent created momentum, and momentum feels like direction, but they're not the same thing. Sixth, you might need to deliberately handicap yourself. This sounds crazy, but hear me out. If you're so comfortable in your talent zone that you never grow, you might need to artificially create constraints that prevent you from defaulting to your strength. The analytical person commits to making a decision based on intuition. The empathetic person practices saying no without explanation. The performer commits to doing something without an audience. You're creating situations where your talent can't save you, where you have to develop new capacities, where you have to be uncomfortable. It's voluntary difficulty, which goes against every instinct that says to play to your strengths. But sometimes, playing to your strengths keeps you stuck in a game you've outgrown. I've learned this slowly and painfully. I've learned that being good at something doesn't mean you have to keep doing it forever. That the thing that made you successful in one phase of life might be irrelevant or constricting in another. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what you're good at toward what you're curious about, even if it means being a beginner again. Even if it means disappointing people who expected you to stay in your box. Here's the liberating truth. You are not your talent. Your talent is something you have, not something you are. And you're allowed to put it down. You're allowed to use it less. You're allowed to develop other things. You're allowed to become interested in domains where you have no advantage. You're allowed to redefine yourself as many times as necessary to stay aligned with who you're becoming rather than who you've been. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And I think one of the primary ways we waste life is by continuing to do what we're good at long after it's stopped nourishing us. By staying in roles our talent assigned to us. By being too afraid or too identified to discover what else we might be. Your talent is a gift, but gifts come with obligations. And sometimes the obligation feels like bondage. Sometimes the thing everyone tells you you're lucky to have feels like exactly what's keeping you trapped. And you're allowed to acknowledge that. You're allowed to say thank you to the talent that served you, and then set it aside to explore what else you might be. That won't make sense to people who've only ever known you through your talent. They'll think you're having a crisis. They'll tell you you're throwing away your advantage. They'll be confused by your illegibility. And that's okay, because you're not living for their understanding. You're living to discover all the versions of yourself that your talent prevented you from meeting. This isn't about abandoning what you're good at entirely. It's about loosening its grip on you, about making it one part of your life rather than the organizing principle of your life, about being willing to be mediocre at new things, about valuing growth over competence, about choosing aliveness over safety. Because in the end, your special talent is only a trap if you let it define the boundaries of your life. If you let it tell you who you are, what you can do, how you should spend your time. But if you can hold it lightly, use it when it serves you, set it aside when it doesn't, then it stops being a trap and becomes just one tool among many that you happen to carry. That's not the story we're told about talent, but it's the true one. And the true version, as always, is more freeing than the fantasy ever was.